My name is David Mosely. I'm a senior music education major here at Wingate University. And over this past year, I've had the opportunity to take 3 wonderful international trips sponsored through Wingate University. The first trip was to Tunisia, in which I took a semester-long course studying the Arab culture of Tunisia. The second trip was to New Zealand, in which I took a semester-long course studying the literature and the indigenous people from New Zealand. And the third trip was to South Africa, which was sponsored by my choir here at Wingate University. The first trip, being Tunisia, was very an unexpected experience. Obviously, when someone thinks of Africa and Tunisia, they think of lions, tigers, and bears. But in this case, it was desert and Arabs speaking French. It was very much a culture shock for me. But I started to, after getting over the initial culture shock, I really started to enjoy my time there, the people there. In fact, some of the experiences I have from these trips are some of the things that I'll never forget. For instance, in Tunisia, we took a jeep excursion through the Sahara Desert and actually visited some of the Star Wars sets that were still there today. We also had the opportunity to travel around the cities and talk to some university students that only spoke French. However, we did have a translator, one of the professors who spoke English, so we were able to have a dialogue with some of the French speaking Arabs there, which was a lot of fun. But I think the most important, or the biggest memory that sticks out to me with Tunisia would definitely have to be when we were literally driving through the desert in this big coach bus, and our tour guide knew someone who lived in a house nearby. And so we stopped, literally, again, in the desert. And we walk about a quarter of a mile out, and we get to this hole in the ground. And it was a big hole. It was about 25 feet wide, 15 feet long. And we realized, as we stepped over it and looked inside, that this was someone's home. And as we made our way around the mountainside, which this hole was located on, we crawled through a cave, and we met some Arab people that lived in this underground, into this hole. And they showed us around, which was literally just holes in the rock that they carved, and this was their home, this was their rooms, their kitchen, and they showed all of it to us. It was surreal. And we even asked questions like, well, what happens if it rains? And they said, well, then it rains, and our house gets flooded. And they built out these trenches to let the water drain out. The thing that blew me away most from the experience was not necessarily, the hole itself that was their house, but the hospitality that they showed us was amazing. As soon as we got there, they didn't really have a door to open up for us, but they showed hospitality in other ways. For instance, as soon as we showed up, they baked us bread, all of us. They made us tea, and they even gave us some of their homemade honey. Considering what they had no Xbox, they had no TV, they didn't even have a car, they had a tractor and a dog, pretty much. And I saw their rooms, their bedrooms were just carpets and rags. But yet they gave us almost everything they had at the moment. And you almost felt guilty taking it. It was one of the most surreal experiences I'll probably ever have. And about 5 months after coming from that experience in Tunisia, I was able to take the opportunity to go to New Zealand. And the thing about New Zealand and the South Africa trips is that they were back to back. The first trip, being to New Zealand, was by far the most beautiful trip I have ever taken in my entire life. New Zealand is gorgeous. We took a trip up to Mount Cook, one of the tallest mountains in New Zealand, one of the more famous mountains, and the scenery was surreal. It was almost as if there should be a green screen behind me, because none of it looked real. It's one of those moments where you just kept looking at something, and for some reason it never got boring. It always captured your interest, just like the first time you saw it. It was a very, very unique experience. One of the more extreme things that I had the opportunity to do in New Zealand was bungee jump. And obviously, without going into any of the details of bungee jumping, I probably said a few choice words on the way down. But it is by far, anytime someone mentions bungee jump now, I immediately tell my story and immediately suggest that either they do it at some point in their life, because it really truly is an exhilarating experience and one that I would do over in a heartbeat. And also, one of the things that sticks out in my mind in a New Zealand trip is actually meeting the indigenous people of New Zealand, which are called the Maori. Learning about the Maori culture before we got there through literature, through some news, and actually through some of the people that live there was very interesting. But we also got to stay in one of their houses for dinner. Just like Tunisia, it landed in such a strange way on my heart. Spending time with someone's family in their home was just completely unique. Being able to eat their food, some of the food in New Zealand, things like chicken flavored potato chips or shrimp flavored potato chips. I mean, just crazy things. Even the ice cream, completely different flavors. Things that they loved more than anything were things that were completely different to us. And last but not least, the trip to South Africa, which was again back to back with New Zealand, was the last trip that I was able to take. And this was by far, I mean, at this point, I'm exhausted from all the trips internationally. But for some reason, just as soon as I stepped into South Africa, again, the experiences and the opportunities just kept coming and coming. For instance, before we went there, the choir at Wingate University actually rehearsed a couple South African songs to sing. And so as we traveled through South Africa, we first landed in Johannesburg, and we would perform at a couple concerts, whether that be at churches or some universities. And the people there were very welcoming, and they were very appreciative. In fact, everywhere we went, obviously being a white American choir of about 30, 40 singers, we drew a lot of attention. So any hotel or restaurant that we went at, someone always asked who we were and where we came from. And we eventually told them that we were a choir, and they immediately asked, well, why don't you sing for us? Well, why don't you sing for us? And so we did. And so we found ourselves singing almost everywhere we went, and they loved it. They loved hearing American choirs, and we loved hearing their South African choirs sing to us. It really was a rewarding experience just to have that music as an element to connect to. We also visited other places like Cape Town, which was beautiful, but we also visited possibly the most important place, or the place in my mind that sticks out the most in South Africa would be Soweto. You hear people say things like the worst shelters here in America are nothing like the best slums in other countries. Well, a place like Soweto is where those phrases come from. I mean, it really was the case in a lot of the areas there. We got on our charter bus and we drove through this town that wasn't a town. There were no buildings. It was literally shacks of tin and wood and brick that they just found. Nothing was organized. It was just slabbed together, and these were their homes. It was a very, very eye-opening experience, and something that makes you really appreciate what you have here, even though we complain about almost all of it. But as we were in Soweto, we also stopped at an orphanage. And the thing about South Africa is everything has a fence around it. Everything had a fence around it. The houses, the communities, the commercial industries. And these fences were made for keeping people out, not just animals. So they were electrified, very intimidating. Even the orphanage itself, we had to walk through this giant tin fence with its double barbed wire surrounding it. And so as we got out of the bus, we walked through this gate into this orphanage. I mean, the orphanage was just a shack. It was something that we wouldn't even consider a building here in America. But yet here were these 12, 16 orphans, ranging from infants to 10, 12-year-olds, I believe. And all we did there as a choir, an American choir there, we come in this shack, really crowded, and we just play with the kids. We just have fun, tell jokes. We end up playing duck, duck, goose with some of them, although they couldn't understand the concept of goose being the time to chase them, so they would just end up chasing everybody anyways. But one of the most influential things that happened in that moment was we decided to sing for them. And as we began to sing, the kids knew some of the songs that we were singing, and so they would join in. And it really was this eye-opening experience for me, because for the first time, as I realized it, is that we weren't performing for anyone. You know, we didn't rehearse or warm up for this event. We were just singing. There was no judge to grade us on how well our intonation was and how well our phrasing had become. You know, there wasn't any reward, or we weren't concerned about our reputation with the other colleges in the area. We were just singing for these kids. And it was almost as if in that moment, music had become its purest form. And it's something that I'll never forget. And honestly, coming back into America and singing solos, singing in ensembles, it's something that I've never been able to compare to. It's something that will always be at one of the pinnacles of my life in terms of memories, in terms of feelings, because these kids didn't even know how to say thank you in English. So it doesn't matter how many people come up to me in America and say, we appreciated your singing, we appreciate this, thank you for this. It was almost as if the gratitude these children showed, just by being there, just by smiling, was more than I've ever experienced here in America or anywhere else in the world. And I also want to make the point to say that none of these trips would have been possible without the opportunities that Wingate University has given me, or rather, including the fundraising opportunities and the financial assistance that Wingate has given me through programs like Wingate's Grant, or giving me other opportunities to fundraise for these trips. So through Wingate University and through the support of others, I've been able to take these experiences and these opportunities, and well, they've changed my life. And I hope that one day someone else will have the opportunity just as I did, and that their lives will